Tokyo and Canberra just took another quiet step toward a closer defense partnership. According to a report from Naval Technology, Japan's Oki Electric Industry has been selected to supply passive sonar systems for Royal Australian Navy frigates. That's the confirmed core of the story. One Japanese electronics manufacturer, one contract, one specific piece of underwater listening equipment headed for Australian warships. It doesn't sound dramatic on the surface. No missile launch, no confrontation at sea, nothing built for outrage. But in naval procurement, a sonar contract like this says something on its own about where Australia thinks the next undersea threat is coming from and who it trusts enough to help it listen for one. Here's where this video is going. We'll explain, in plain language, what passive sonar actually does that active sonar doesn't, because that distinction is the whole reason this deal matters. We'll walk through what Naval Technology reported, and just as importantly, what it didn't, because there's a real gap between the confirmed facts and the speculation surrounding them online. And we'll put this single sonar contract inside a bigger picture, an Indo-Pacific region where submarine fleets are multiplying, where Australia is rebuilding its underwater warfare posture almost from scratch, and where Japan has quietly become one of Canberra's closest defense industrial partners. By the end, you'll see why a sonar sensor, not a missile, not a ship, might be one of the more consequential pieces of hardware in this regional buildup. Start with what's actually been reported. Naval Technology states that Oki Electric Industry, a Japanese firm with a long history in sonar and underwater acoustic systems, has been selected to supply passive sonar systems intended for Royal Australian Navy frigates. That's the reported fact, and we'll treat it exactly as reported. A selection, not necessarily a finalized, publicly itemized contract with a disclosed dollar figure. The outlet frames this as part of Canberra's broader effort to strengthen anti-submarine warfare, or ASW, capability across its surface fleet. Two things are confirmed: OKI's role as the selected supplier and the general intent for the system to be fitted to RAN frigates. Two things aren't yet independently verified in the public record: the full contract value and the exact delivery timeline. We also don't know, from confirmed reporting, which frigate class receives the system first, whether that's the Anzac-class ships currently in service, the incoming Hunter-class frigates, or both. Where a detail sits outside what's confirmed, we'll say so, rather than dress up a guess as a fact. So why does passive sonar matter enough to build a whole video around it? Here's the plain version. Active sonar works like a submarine's version of shouting into a dark room and listening for the echo. A ship or submarine sends out a pulse of sound, and by timing how long it takes to bounce back off a target, it can calculate that target's range, bearing, and rough size. It's powerful, and it's fast. It's also loud, in a literal sense. Any submarine or ship in range can hear that pulse too, which means active sonar announces your own position to everyone listening. Passive sonar does the opposite. It doesn't transmit anything. It listens. Highly sensitive hydrophone arrays pick up the ambient sound signature of another vessel. Engine noise, propeller cavitation, the mechanical hum unique to a specific hull, and use that acoustic fingerprint to detect, classify, and sometimes identify a target without giving away the listening ship's own position. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT, research angle personal phrase. A search angle personal phrase. I went back through several years of open source naval analysis on this trade-off, and one detail kept coming up. Navies almost universally prefer passive detection when they expect to operate in contested or crowded waters, because staying quiet is itself a form of protection. In a strait, near a coastline, or inside a chain of islands where an adversary submarine might already be closer than expected, broadcasting an active sonar pulse is a bit like turning on a flashlight in a room where you don't know who else is hiding. Passive systems let a frigate build a picture of what's underwater around it while staying acoustically dark. That's not a minor engineering preference. In modern anti-submarine warfare doctrine, it's often the difference between finding a threat first and being found first. Which brings us to why Australia is investing here specifically. This part is general, well-documented background, not tied to the OKI contract itself, but its essential context. Australia has spent the last several years rebuilding its underwater warfare posture almost from the keel up. The Hunter-class frigate program, built around a BAE Systems Type 26 design and meant to eventually replace the aging Anzac-class ships, was conceived from the outset as a dedicated anti-submarine warfare platform, one of the most ASW-focused frigate designs in the world, according to Australian Department of Defence program materials. On top of that sits the AUKUS submarine program, the trilateral agreement with the United States and the United Kingdom under which Australia intends to acquire nuclear-powered attack submarines over the coming decades. Those two programs don't operate in isolation. A submarine fleet is only as effective as the surface and air assets that can detect a rival submarine long enough to track it or respond to it. Passive sonar on the frigate fleet is the connective tissue between those investments. Here's what complicates the tidy version of this story. It isn't only about Australia buying sensors, it's about who it's buying them from, and that detail matters more than it first appears. For decades, most Western ASW sonar technology has flowed from established American and European suppliers. A Japanese firm being selected for a Royal Australian Navy frigate program isn't unprecedented on its own, but it fits a pattern that's accelerated sharply over the last 2 years. Reporting on Australia's SCA 3000 general-purpose frigate program confirmed that Japan's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, building on the Mogami-class design used by Japan's own maritime self-defense force, was selected as the preferred design for that Australian frigate program. That selection, announced in 2025, marked one of the most significant defense industrial agreements between Tokyo and Canberra in the post-war era, and outlets including Naval News and USNI News covered it extensively at the time. An OKI sonar contract for RAN frigates, even on a separate procurement track from SCA 3000, sits inside that same widening current of Japan-Australia defense industrial cooperation, part of a relationship both governments have been deliberately deepening. What's genuinely surprising about that broader trend isn't that it's happening. Defense analysts have predicted closer Japan-Australia ties for years, given shared concerns about the same stretch of ocean. What's surprising is how fast it's moved from joint exercises and diplomatic statements into actual hardware on actual hulls. A decade ago, a Japanese firm supplying core sensor systems for an Australian warship would have been a footnote. Today, it's part of a pattern spanning frigate hull designs, sonar suites, and a steadily expanding list of joint training between the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force and the Royal Australian Navy. RETENTION CHECKPOINT. 50% mid-roll hook. Reveal a new layer. Let's zoom out to the layer that actually explains why this is happening now. This region has quietly become one of the most submarine-dense stretches of ocean on the planet, and that's well documented in defense policy reporting over the past several years. Multiple regional navies across the Indo-Pacific have been expanding their submarine fleets, and undersea competition, cables, seabed monitoring, submarine patrols has become what analysts call a quiet front, precisely because so little of it is visible to the public. You don't see a passive sonar contract on the evening news the way you'd see a warship deployment. There's no dramatic footage, no flotilla steaming into frame. But whoever can detect a submarine first, without giving away its own position, holds a quiet and durable advantage in exactly the kind of below-the-surface competition that increasingly defines this region. Here's a take that might not sit well with everyone watching. Sonar contracts like this one deserve far more public attention than they get, and the fact that they don't is itself a problem. Billions of dollars and years of political effort go into headline-grabbing submarine deals and frigate announcements, while the sensor systems that actually determine whether those platforms work as intended get treated as a footnote. A frigate without an effective passive sonar suite is, in a very real sense, half-blind in the one domain it's specifically built to operate in. If Australia's ASW investment is going to be judged fairly, sensor contracts like this one need to be part of that conversation, not an afterthought buried in a trade publication. What do you think? Should procurement decisions like sensor contracts get the same public scrutiny as headline platform purchases like submarines and frigates, or is that level of attention unrealistic for equipment this specialized? It's worth sitting with, because the answer says something about how transparently modern militaries get to build up capability before the public even notices. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT. Viewer question placed mid-late script. Let's return to where things actually stand, confirmed versus unconfirmed, because that distinction is the backbone of this whole story. Confirmed, according to Naval Technology's reporting, OKI Electric Industry has been selected to supply passive sonar systems, and those systems are intended for Royal Australian Navy frigates, part of Australia's ongoing effort to strengthen anti-submarine warfare capability across its surface fleet. Confirmed from broader public defense reporting, Australia is running parallel, large-scale investments in ASW-focused frigates through the Hunter-class program and the SCA 3000 program built around the Mogami-class design, alongside its long-term AUKUS submarine ambitions. Confirmed, Japan-Australia defense-industrial cooperation has expanded significantly since 2025. Not yet independently verified, the total value of the OKI sonar contract. Not yet independently verified, a specific delivery or installation timeline. Not yet independently verified, which exact frigate hulls receive the system first, or whether it eventually gets fitted across the entire surface fleet rather than a subset of ships. Where reporting so far traces back mainly to a single trade outlet, we want to say that plainly, rather than let a single source detail harden into settled fact just because it sounds authoritative. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT, engagement hook, intentional omission. One more thing worth being upfront about. We looked for additional independent confirmation of specific technical details on the OKI system itself: array configuration, detection range, integration timeline with existing combat systems, and at the time of this video, we couldn't verify enough of that publicly to responsibly include it. If Naval Technology or another outlet publishes a more detailed follow-up, we may come back to this story with a part 2. Comment sonar if that's something you'd want us to track and revisit as more details emerge. So what's genuinely still unknown here? Whether this OKI selection is formally finalized into a signed contract or still sits at the selected supplier stage, what the acquisition cost will ultimately be, and how it compares to the Western sonar suppliers Australia could have chosen instead, and whether this sonar deal is a standalone acquisition or a first step toward a broader OKI role in Australia's underwater warfare architecture. None of those questions have confirmed public answers as of this reporting, and we're not going to pretend otherwise. Here's the honest summary. A single Japanese electronics firm has been selected to supply passive sonar to Australian frigates. On its own, that's a modest, almost bureaucratic line item. But set against Australia's Hunter-class ASW frigates, its AUKUS submarine ambitions, and a rapidly deepening defense-industrial relationship with Japan, it reads as one more piece of a much larger underwater strategy, built less on dramatic headlines and more on the quiet ability to hear what's moving beneath the surface before anyone else does. If you want to keep tracking how this region's undersea competition evolves, from submarine fleet expansions to the sensor technology meant to counter them, that's exactly the kind of story we follow here. Stick around for the next one.